Well, hello again. Welcome back to the channel. We've got a very, very wet day here today. Filming this on Friday the 18th of June. The first rain we've had really this month in June. It's great because my water butts need filling up. News about the show. Final tips for, well, what will be now a virtual show. There's a few clues for you. So let's have a look. Well, hello there, welcome back to the channel. David Taylor or Mr Pelargonium back here. It's news about the show. Unfortunately, I think as many people knew, if you're based in the UK, the Prime Minister announced that the postponement of the final easing of lockdown measures is going to be put back 4 weeks. And that effectively, just to cut a long story short, knocked our show on the head once again for this year. That's a proper show, that is, in a hall or marquee, whatever. So that was it. That was gone. We were due to, of course, held it next weekend, next Saturday. The measures originally were meant to be eased from this coming Monday. That's all now gone back 4 weeks. So that's the end of that for this year again. So that's 2 years that we won't have been able to hold a physical show. But we will be doing another virtual show, slightly different approach this year for any members that may be interested in showing some plants. Relatively straightforward scenario of basically doing a very short video for your plants. I will either put a link through to one I did last year. I think I did a little video last year for it. I'll connect to that because it'll be exactly the same scenario. Slightly different with what we do with our videos though this year because there's going to be a slightly different way of entering them. But all that will be in information provided on the website, so just have a look at that. Now, one of the things that we need to do now at this stage, I mean, we are still sort of projecting that we're going to do the virtual show in the same weekend as the revised show, which is basically next weekend. Originally, of course, before we knew about all the changes and roadmap and whatever, the show was originally meant to be tomorrow when we were to hold it at Fibrex Nursery, but all that had to be cancelled, of course, once the roadmap was announced back in February. So we are sticking, though, with the revised day, the revised weekend, because you'll have all weekend. You'll have several days to get your virtual entries in, but we're sticking with the revised weekend, which is next weekend. The 26th, 27th and also 25th we allow entries to be put in. So all the information though will be on the website. We'll link to it from our Facebook page, so have a look at that. But I will also be sort of providing a few tips on how to do your videos with either a link to this one or I'll do it separately. So that's enough on that. Now, final preparations for when you present plants in a show is making sure they're clean and getting rid of dead florets. I've got a few here that I can do, and I'll take the camera off and show you what we can do with some of the plants. Right, now one of the first plants that we can have a look at here is this sort of really nice, lovely dwarf single. Now, a number of these heads are going over, just beginning to go over, but you can see here that we've got dying florets just at the top there, and it's not too difficult to get rid of them. I mean, you can just slightly arch the bloom. I mean, they're falling off, so you need to get rid of all of these petals, and it is just a question of ensuring your plants are clean and tidy and that all the heads are nice and fresh. But we have got, you can do this. I wouldn't recommend really doing this much after a week to go, because under here, look, you've got all these new little floret buds just beginning to pull up. So you'd want those to go through, you want those to grow up, and it will take a week for them to come back. So in general terms, it's always the florets in the middle of the plant that will die off first. We've got another one just above it here. We can take these out by hand. A single is a little bit easier to do because these are quite open heads. So I'm just literally snapping them off, just pull them backwards. These are questionably, this is almost an extreme, this plant, because it's it's almost, these heads are almost past it. It's not probably a very good example to do because most of these heads I think are probably past their best. So this will be a plant that will probably miss the show because another week to go, you're not really going to get the bounce up of fresh buds from underneath. So it's very questionable whether this plant would make it. But there you see we've got a brand new bud that's just beginning to break out, and that will fill that gap. So there's a good example of sort of what happens with blooms that are ready to sort of form up and replace the one that you've just taken out. I've got some heads coming through underneath, you can see. So what I would probably do now, in a plant that I know has missed the boat, if we go back out, in a plant that I know has missed the boat, what I would do realistically is probably take a lot of these heads off and wait for all the new heads to come through, and that will then look, it would be rejuvenated somewhat, but it would have missed the shows. But there's still plenty there to enjoy on this particular plant, and it's a plant called Jean Swansborough. It's one of mine that I bred a number of years ago, one of my early ones really. It's a lovely little dwarf, flowers very well. This was going to be the first year that I would have considered to show it. Okay, so let's have a look at a double then. Now, this is actually what I would call floribunda plants in a 6-inch pot. Right, and with doubles, it's exactly the same scenario. Here's a particular head. I'll home in on this one. You can see here, these have just gone over. So again, it's exactly the same scenario. The only trouble is, because it's double, you make even more mess. But I think this, in this case, every single one has just about gone over. There's only 3 new florets coming up underneath. So that almost certainly would be a head that you would have to just completely snap off. And there it is, it's gone. That one's gone over. Others here, let's have a look. It's just a question of reviewing to see where we are and see how... You've got to do it in proportion to how many florets, fresh florets you've got coming up underneath. That one's fine, that one's fine. Here's another one, you see the centre has just completely gone. All of this centre needs pulling out. Let's have a little look to see then, this final look at how we do this. Just go down and pinch them out at the base of the little floret, sort of base stem there. You can see there's a few new ones beginning to break, so I've taken most of the dead ones out. There's one on the edge, just get rid of that one. They're easy to pinch off. And there we are. This is probably more of a classic type floret cleaning job. We've got rid of the middle, which is of course where the earliest florets would have been. And we've got some lovely, quite a number of fresh florets, it's a bit of a mouthful to say, coming through underneath. And you can see them just beginning to break. There's one there. And they will hopefully fill that gap. But of course then we've got the debate about whether all these others in a week's time, around about a week's time, will still be relatively fresh. But that's just something that you have to weigh up on the day. If you've got some really dirty ones on the day, it might be easy just to pluck them out and just push it up with your hand to get a good shaped head. Of course, you're not going to get the chronic scrutiny in terms of judging, do it in a virtual show, but you still want to try and make your plants relatively presentable. Now, in terms of my own plants, some of my regals have at long last come on, so we can have a look at a few of those. I've finally started to get a bit of colour on my regals. This may be all right for next week for the show. Got a lot of, there are gaps in these heads, but there's a lot of bloom coming through to fill some of these gaps. So it's remarkable, really, this warm June, how it's really chronically pushed the plants on. Who knows what might happen in a week. This is a Saturn. This is probably one of the best ones I've got. If this head falls out and that one goes as well, I think that could be quite good. But of course, the problem that you face potentially is, of course, that then some of these other heads may start to go over. So, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. There's a Robin Louise. That is almost at its peak now. I've got a dead head through there, look. So that would have to come out come sort of next Friday. But that's almost at its peak now. I've got a lilac Elaine there. I mean, it really is incredible to think that just 2 to 3 weeks ago there were barely any buds showing. I mean, it's incredible. 3 weeks ago, that was like that, with just 1 or 2 buds just beginning to break through. I mean, those 3 are very late. And this is the real dark corner of the greenhouse. Although it does get quite good light late in the day, it just goes to show it's the light levels that makes the difference for regal pelargoniums. They need a lot of light. There's my standard. That's not too bad. I mean, I will probably enter that. There is going to be a class this year for a fan or standard, basically a trained plant. So I will enter that. We'll see how it goes. Some other regals here. There's a pretty decent floribunda there, but 1 or 2 of these heads are just beginning to mark. That's probably one of the best ones I've got, but I think another week is going to be very debatable. Here are all a number of my new to me regals. Delhi, we've seen that last week. Fifth Avenue as well. That's a lovely. That has grown really fast. I only got that in the spring from Fibrex Nursery, but that has grown like absolute wildfire. And another interesting one, if I come back out, have a look at this. This got more comments last week. Let's just take this off, actually. This got more comments last week than any of my plants. What is that horrendous looking plant that you've got there, David? Everybody was saying. So let's just have a look at this and clean this up. This was a new plant that I got this year from a friend on the committee. It's called Harvest Moon. I think it's quite an attractive regal, actually, this one. It's got a lovely sort of pale pink, white throat and a lovely crimson feather. But yeah, it was in a little bit of a state when I got it. But I've sort of fed it through, it's been watered, it's been repotted. All the fresh growth, though, you can see on the top is all sort of quite clean. It'll take a little while to get going, but all of these now I can break off. And I had quite a few comments about this when I showed the last video, because it stood out like a sore thumb. But it is a little bit of a mess, but it'll all break through quite nicely. I'm growing it as a bit of a vaguish standard, to be quite honest, but yeah, this will be chopped. Once it all begins to break through a bit, I'll probably cut it down to make it a little bit neater. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of dead and dying growth on it, but as long as you don't overwater, just be a bit careful when you repot. Don't overwater them. Make sure that they slowly just get into their new compost. And then they will start to throw, fresh new leaves, and you can sort of go from there. And that's what I'll be doing on this one. But yeah, it was a little bit of a state, this one, when I first got hold of it. But it's coming through now, and it will look quite tidy, I'm sure, in the future. And I'll show you its development, as that caused quite a bit of interest. Okay, so there we are, a few little sort of final tips for the virtual show, as will be now. Now, I have been making a lot of videos that I haven't had the time to process yet. Because up until the beginning of this week, of course, we were still having a physical show, which involves an awful lot of work from myself as show secretary. So I've not had any time to process any of them yet. But once we get the virtual show out the way next weekend, I'll start to sort of put together a good number of videos about all kinds of things in our in the greenhouse environment during the summer here. Lots going on, of course, repotting, keeping your plants clean and tidy, lots of standards growing very big, as you can perhaps see over this side. Lots of stuff going on, but I have been doing the odd bit of filming here and there. Now, do remember that the show this year, the virtual show, the exhibits are going to be shown on the YouTube channel. So they're going to be put on this channel, so you'll be able to see them all through. They will only be published for the judge to look at them initially, but they will be put out to the public at a point just after that, once the results are announced. So you'll be able to see all the classes, and hopefully you'll see some pretty decent plants. So in the meantime, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.